Hello and welcome to 10 Lessons Learned, the podcast where we talk to leaders, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things from around the world to uncover lessons that shape their careers, business, and lives. Our goal is simple, to make the world a little wiser, lesson by lesson. My name is Jeffery Wang, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's episode. I'm the founder of Sydney Professional Development Forum, a basketball tragic, and the proud father of my two gorgeous boys. Before we dive in, a quick message for our listeners. 10 Lessons Learned will always be free for you, but it takes our blood, sweat, and tears to make. So if you found value in our episodes, please consider supporting the program, whether it be by sharing the show with a friend, leaving us a review, or checking out our affiliate partner, Audible. Every bit helps us continue bringing you the lessons that matters most. Speaking of Audible, they're a fantastic way to enjoy 10 Lessons Learned alongside thousands of audiobooks and other inspiring podcasts. Whether you're on the go or unwinding at home, Audible makes it easy to build a library of wisdom. You can try it for 30 days at audibletrial.com/10 lessons learned. That's audibletrial.com/10 lessons learned. The link is in our show notes, so check it out and start listening today. Now, let's meet our special guest for today, Jameel Rehman. Jameel Rehman, how are you? Well, you're a multi-dimensional being, all right? So this is according to his profile. A conscious technologist, an elite technology salesperson, a sales coach, mentor, comedian, musician, and much more. So in other words, you can't put him in a box. So despite having a stellar career as a tech seller in Telstra and Cisco, you've also built a tech sales academy to try and fix the global gap in sales education or tech sales education and to pass on your expertise. Last 5 years, you've gone through a bit of a spiritual awakening and a complete transformation, which I'm sure we'll get into later. You've got tools, systems, insights on your podcast, The Binge Thinker. I like the sound of that. Yeah, so I love how you incorporate your learnings into the academy and to share with your community on how to transform their lives for the better and build abundant futures for themselves. So if you want to follow Jameel, you can find them at the Conscious Tech Sales community at www.school, that's skool.com/Tech Sales Academy to get weekly insights or tech sales and personal performance through his 1% Club newsletter. So, welcome to the show, Jameel.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. It's good to finally be here. We've going back and forth for a bit of time. It's good to finally chat with you and shoot the fat.
100%. Look, now for the benefit of our audience, Jameel came to my attention a while back, actually, when a friend of mine sent me this video of somebody who has left Telstra. In fact, you left under some pretty tragic circumstances through a redundancy, I believe.
Mm.
And basically, we watched it and we shared a lot of the sentiments that you expressed through that video. I don't know if you've got a bit of background around that that you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, so I was at Telstra Enterprise or Telstra my entire career as a technology seller. I was a really high performer there. Over the last few years, they've let go over 10,000 jobs over the last 3 or 4 years, and I was one of them. And whilst I was there, the year I was made redundant, I was actually a top 1% performer. I was looking after a VIP account. I was a bit of a golden child as far as doing things inside the business and was still made redundant. And I think someone from my background in like just trying to be honest and be as forthright as I can, I just shared a lot of my pain, a lot of my frustrations. I forgot to ask, can we swear on this podcast or not?
No, go for it.
Good, because it devastated me being made redundant when I thought I was flying high. I thought it was going to be the future of that organization. And when I got made redundant, I was like, fuck this. I never want to work for another corporation again, because I never felt more like a cog in the machine and really felt capitalism at its worst. And by just sharing the pain, the frustration, the anger on a public broadcast and a public forum like LinkedIn, which, there's me in tears, saying, fuck Telstra. It really resonated with a lot of people because, there's been thousands of people that have been made redundant. When you go through that process, and, you've been there yourself there, Jeff, is like, holy, you're supposed to put on the corporate smile and the facade that everything's okay. And thanks for the opportunity. but you are herded out like cattle. You never feel any more like a number. And there's no one really helps you process the pain and the abandonment and the what next of your life. And yeah, so I put that out there. My career over the last 3 or 4 years has been about rebuilding in my career, building my own personal freedom, trying to get out of the machine for good,
Yep.
and really just sharing how I really feel. And especially in a platform like LinkedIn, where it's all corporate facade and wear the mask. Although we as a society and a collective are getting past that and are so sick of that,
Mm.
it felt like a big risk emotionally, personally, professionally to do that, but it resonated with a lot of people, yourself included, mate. And, like dozens of messages of support, and going, man, I really feel you in this one. And yeah, that's what resonates is like you give genuine human emotions over digital platforms. That's the future of the digital economy if you do it right. It resonates with people at scale. And we end up with conversations and situations like this where just invite me to the podcast, and I'm very grateful for it.
And the reason is because of the authenticity in how much you shared. And the truth being told, I think a lot of people are in that boat because we too bought into that corporate bullshit when we first started our careers, thinking that if you were to work hard, put everything in there, that, you will somehow be rewarded for your loyalty, for your hard work. And many of us haven't even got to the level that you have got to in that, you're seen as a top performer, you're in that 1% club. And, so when you're sky high like that, you think that nothing could touch you, that you're indispensable to a company, when in actual fact, you've always been a number. And I suppose that they're dangling that 1% club as a carrot, as a way of controlling your behaviors to make you, essentially work for them. I guess my learning from the years in the corporate is to never, ever sort of bank your identity, your corporate career. If your sense of self-worth come from, how much money you can pull in from your sales, and, hey, yeah, you're either forever going to be tied to that, and you're only as good as last year's numbers. Come July 1st, you're back to zero again, and then you have to go and prove yourself again. And unfortunately, if that's the sense of identity that you have, then you'll be chasing, I suppose, this for a long time, which is rather meaningless. The other thing that really intrigued me about you, and as I watched it, is I realized that with your communication skills, you mentioned you're a comedian, you're a musician, you're a performer. There's dimensions to your being that I'd certainly like to get into to understand what drives you as a person, and ultimately where you're up to in terms of what success looks like and mean to you. Because I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who are very disillusioned with the corporate as you have been, but they want to see that there is light at the end of a tunnel. There is still a greater sense of purpose that you could find, and hence I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I have to agree though. Like one of the biggest lessons from that experience was I had put so much of my identity in corporate hands, and that's because I started my career at Telstra. I started in the retail shops. I have no technical background. I had no B2B experience. I came from nothing. I was a bit of a bum before I joined Telstra. I was just like, yeah, I'm pretty good at talking to people and I'm good with technology. Let me just get into this, and then you succeed and the money comes in. I come from a migrant background of nothing to then see big money fall in your pocket. You're like, I'm doing well at this thing. Yeah, you put your identity into it. It's a way to define your success, especially when you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure out who you are. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be this guy. And then that gets taken away from you and you have to wonder, yeah, who are you really? What is your identity? It can't be external and it can't be put in the hands of others, or else you can't trust them, or they'll take it away and then you're left with nothing.
That's right. 100%. All right. Well, now I love how you've approached this exercise actually. So, in your typical style, you gave me 10 lessons, but you started with number 10 first. So I'll go from 10 to 1. So just for a bit of fun, lesson number 10: the universe is mental. What do you mean by that?
All we have in life is our mind, and this is something that through a spiritual awakening that I had in 2019, where I was having a bit of an identity crisis, and I'm trying to figure out who I was. I went deep into who I was. I had not really explored myself, who I was, defined my own identity, really knew myself internally. And through a lot of work, physically, spiritually, mentally, I've done a lot of research, and really all we have in our existences is our minds. Like
Mm.
our brains, is the physical manifestation of our minds. And
Mhm.
really that is the broadcast of our lives, right? How we perceive the world, how we see everything from someone as close as you said your two boys, is knowing them so closely, intimately, to as far as the
Mhm.
furthest star in the universe, in the night sky that you can perceive. That is all inside your head. And the way that you interpret life is based on how your mind perceives things. And realistically, our mind is created through a series of interconnections that have been defined not by us for anywhere from birth to 20 years, to being an
Mm.
adult. We don't really mature our brains until 25. And that's if you're lucky, really.
Mhm.
There's plenty of immature people out there. So when it comes to working on yourself, when it comes to changing yourself for the better, changing the way you perceive the world for the better, you have to understand your mind. You
Mm.
have to change that wiring. You have to unlearn behaviors. You need to relearn positive behaviors, because unfortunately, like we said, there is this broader disillusionment with society, the way we've been raised, our culture, our values. And
Mm.
something that I say to a lot of people is yesterday's systems do not guarantee or do not build tomorrow's abundant future. That
Mm.
we are seeing societal systems crumble, cultural systems crumble. We're heading into this unknown. AIs threatening our existential being here as
Mm.
humans. And
Yep.
it's something that's really challenging to look into.
Mm.
And, if realistically, one of my missions now in life is to, if I redesigned myself, right? I
Mm.
redesigned my mind through a bunch of tools and processes and learnings, and really re-architect and reprogram myself towards
Mm.
abundance, towards goodwill, towards health, towards optimism. And yeah, we are really just mental engineers of ourselves. When we talk about being more conscious individuals, we are leveraging our conscious minds, our highest potential, our dream state for ourselves that we perceive ourselves to be the best of, and really undoing the subconscious behaviors in our
Yeah. Yeah.
minds, the previous versions of ourselves that tell us we couldn't, or, have just we've been traumatized, and the source code hasn't been
Yeah.
installed properly, or we are not
Mm.
even having the right systems and processes installed into our brains. One of my biggest learnings this year is I suck at managing money.
Mm.
And that's, tracing that back, I did not have any proper financial education from my parents, from the school system. None of us
Mm.
do,
Yep.
right? So that, yeah, as far as going to the mind, it's like all we have is our minds. All we have is the skill sets we develop and download into ourselves, how we
Yep.
perceive is it's all in here. It's one big memory bank, and
Yep.
we need to declutter it, because a
Yep.
lot of the software and a lot of the programs in there are not
Mm.
ours, and they're not healthy, and they're not correct.
Mhm.
And if we are to get better as a society, we need to get better at the individual level, and that requires you to understand your mind,
Yep.
and most importantly, make a friend of your mind.
Mm.
Really, all we have in life.
100%. So if I could replay back, I mean, I think I understand where you're getting at. I thought when you said universe is mental, it means the universe is crazy. But what you're really saying is that your reality is essentially created in your mind, and being aware of the programming in your mind is incredibly important, because ultimately some of the software that's put there, when you're young by your parents, as you said, and then you refer to the migrant culture, of which I'm part of it as well.
Mm,
Essentially, a lot of the programming in our mind are not our friends. You know, we have all sorts of negative experiences in our lives, and sometimes we take that as confirmation of certain attributes about us. So, for example, if we were to, I'm a mad basketball fan, and through coaching my kids, I've learned a few things.
mm,
Essentially, losing a game is not confirmation that you suck at it.
mm.
unfortunately, when we're growing up, we're told that, when you're not very good at something, it means, you're not meant for it, you're not talented. What we don't get taught is the growth mindset that, instead of taking the loss as a confirmation that you suck at it, you should be taking it as motivation that you should be working harder and putting twice as much effort into something, and that's what I suppose that's what you call a growth mindset. Knowing that when you can master that, then you master your future. And 100% in terms of the financial education, if you realize you suck at managing money, it doesn't mean that you're always suck. It just means that you need to update it with new software that allows you to make it your friend. So
That's it.
very good lesson indeed.
Mm.
All right, lesson number 9, going backwards. Discipline is divinity. What do you mean by that?
Like I said before, I was not built with discipline. I was an only child up until I was 12 years old. And I consider myself one of the first of this screen generation. And that is, my childhood, as an only child, didn't have a lot of, I had friends, but because my parents were busy trying to put a roof over their head, I didn't really get a lot of time with other kids. I just wasn't a bit of a child of neglect, unfortunately. So these essential skills and programs I had to learn as an adult and relearn them as an adult and go backwards to go forwards. And one of those fundamental traits and skills is discipline. I was a very undisciplined child and I had a lot of potential, but I had never had a work ethic put into me. And all of the work that I have done on myself has come from consistent, conscious, deliberate, disciplined actions. So, for example, losing weight and transforming myself physically, I lost like 15 kilos in 16 weeks over the pandemic. And that was because of discipline. That was me just going, I have to do this no matter what happens, no matter how I feel about the food or the exercise or how much I hate it. I've got to do it. And basically, you have to chisel yourself and define a vision for yourself first of who you are, the highest, most ideal self. And that is through divinity, what is the most highest form of ourselves at a spiritual level. And you craft yourself through discipline. You chip away at yourself at the parts of yourself that don't serve you anymore, and the behaviors, the actions. There is a great line that I carry a lot with me. It's by a guy called Alexis Carroll, and he says, man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is the marble and the sculptor. And everything that you want to do to improve your life will suck at first. Everything sucks. I've sucked at so many things over the last 5 years and been okay with it because that's what you need to do. It's just that our minds are our egos hate the unfamiliar. And there is so much about the world that is unfamiliar. And realistically, we getting rid of that fear and getting better at things is just firing and wiring those neurons together, getting our brain to actually just connect those dots and practice using those things over and over again. Right. And really, discipline is a pushing past of the impulsive nature that we are as evolved monkeys, right? We're monkeys with plans, and we've evolved through impulse and instinct. Instincts, useful. Impulses, not. Right? So impulse control, like understanding your emotional triggers as to, for example, why do I like to reach for food, for comfort eating, right? These are the impulses that we have. And you won't get anywhere in life without being disciplined. Hard work beats talent every day. You said you're a basketball fan, Jeff, the Mamba mentality, right?
Indeed.
Kobe would outwork everyone. And I'm not a big basketball guy, but I do appreciate that mindset. And even when I'm trying to stretch for that, when you're just stretching for those last things, those last chapters in life, that last bit of work, something that he says that's in my head all the time, he says, job's not done. Right. I think
That's right.
I think he was like, up a couple of games in the finals one year. And it's like, you're comfortably ahead, but the job's not done, mate. The job's not done. It's done when I'm holding the cup. It's done when I have the glory in hand. And I think about that a lot. And it drives me to go that extra mile and to really make sure I'm crossing that finish line in life as much as I can. And you have to be disciplined. No matter what you want to achieve in life, any skill, any perspective, it is consistent discipline, action, pushing past the ego, which
Mm.
wants to seek familiarity. That's all it wants. It
Yeah.
just
It
protects.
just wants comfort. Yeah.
Wants comfort.
So I can sort of relate that to I suppose stoicism. The idea that
Mm,
anything that's worth something, it's only worth something if you had to pay a price for it. It's a suffering that you had to go through for it. And I
mm,
think you're right about Kobe. He's onto something. The fact is he's got this mentality where the journey is I suppose that the journey is a reward for him in that he understands that it's going to mean that much more because of what he puts in. And the
mm,
fact is that he was willing to put in more than anybody else, and that's why when he holds up the cup, it means a lot more. I mean,
mm,
I guess going back to the sporting analogy, it's one thing to barrack for a team. My team, Boston Celtics, won the championships last year,
mm,
but I had exactly zero effort to do with that. So even though I enjoyed the win, I bet you Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, who led that team, enjoyed it a whole lot more than I did because of all the blood, sweat, and tears he put into. They put into getting into that result. And I think if we can focus on that, discipline becomes easier. Understanding that, that discipline is the reason that you will enjoy the success of your efforts.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
And you think
mm,
about it, to go back to the analogy of discipline
mm,
is divinity, great people are known for one thing often,
mm,
right? They've often honed themselves into one particular point of mastery that they're known for. Covered with
mm,
basketball, right?
mm,
There's examples like Schwarzenegger, great guy, multidimensional as well. But
mm,
Albert Einstein, science, right? All the
mm,
people that we look up to. If you think about gods, most of the
mm,
gods that we see in polytheistic societies are
mm.
known for one thing, right?
That's right.
So there is a degree of that greatness that you want is that you have to become significantly obsessed and unbalanced in one thing. And that's what you are known for. And I think there is this broader trend now of the great generalists. Like I said, someone like a Schwarzenegger, but again, that he had a powerful mind and he was one of the most disciplined individuals. And if you watch his Netflix series, great series to watch about how he had his own vision for himself, the incredible discipline it takes to become a physical champion of bodybuilding. I used to like
Mm,
bodybuilding when I was younger. And that's pure discipline as well,
mm,
right? And that's what it is that you have to take conscious, intentional, deliberate actions in the direction that you want to go in life.
yep.
And you are going to face resistance, and that's a natural part of the universe. And the more
Hmm.
resistance you face for the right reasons, the more likely you will succeed.
That's right. All right. Lesson number 8: own your story.
Mm.
Clearly you've got a very good story there. But what do you mean by owning your own story?
Well, similar to what the mind is about, we all have these stories about ourselves
Hmm.
that are true. Some of them are untrue. A lot of them are not true at all.
Hmm.
And again, there's a narrative that have been implanted by the ego because of trauma, a situation that again creates a narrative in your head that's been told in your mind for years without us even consciously being aware of it to say that we can.
Hmm.
And that's really important as part of there's two facets of this. The internal knowledge of yourself is to understand the stories and the narratives that you're telling yourself.
Hmm.
And then externally, it's been a real big lesson for me to own who I am and where I've come from, my challenges, my pain, and my victories, and
Hmm.
share them with the world. And so when we talk about, for example, the creator economy now, and that a lot of people want that authenticity. They don't want the big corporate brand, the facade. They really are looking at the individuals that are showing the struggle, going through the pain, telling you, I'm just like you. That's powerful. But one of the big leaps that you have to make when you, for example, myself, in making that leap and telling my story, being on podcasts like this, talking about spirituality and awakening, and again, putting my tears and me
Hmm.
crying on LinkedIn, right?
Hmm.
That is ownership of the story of who I am. And that
Hmm.
is scary as hell to do for anyone because
Hmm.
you really are putting yourself in the most vulnerable state of who you are out into the world. And we fear that judgment, right?
Hmm.
We are not, I think Bezos said this, we are not truth seeking animals. We are, I think it was like compliance seeking animals, or we're socially
Yeah,
seeking animals. We want the
that's right.
acceptance of our peers, and our
Hmm.
monkey minds, want that acceptance more than anything else. So it is a huge, blow to the ego and a huge amount of resistance to do that initially when you put yourself out to the world earnestly and honestly. But what I've recognized, the rewards come. You know, I've shared my transformation, my struggles openly. I get messages from people who resonate with that, resonate with the pain, with the success. It's inspiring, and that's beautiful, right? It's absolutely beautiful stuff. And it motivates me to go out and talk more and share my story, because I know that I've done some pretty crazy things in my life, especially in the last 5 years, to be where I am. And that's really part of the mission, is to be able to tell the story of who I am, because I know it'll resonate with a lot of people. Because if I look to the future, there's going to be this generation, 2 generations of the screen generation, people that have lost themselves to the screen and the cheap dopamine and being raised in front of a device their entire lives, who are wanting to return to themselves and going, what the hell is wrong with me? Just like I did 5 years ago. So if I can tell that story and say, hey man, I was you, and this is how I've got here, and this is how I solved the problem of what you've currently got, that's powerful. And that's really what I'm banking on, and the ownership of the story, the highs, the lows, to broadcast that into the world. And it's really important that anyone that wants to put themselves out there, I know, this economy is growing, you have to do it, right? You have to own who you are, for better or for worse. And the water is fine. What do I mean by that? You take that leap. It sucks. It still sucks every week for me to talk about my life and, things I shouldn't be saying. But once you get into it, there's rewards, and there is that authenticity in the leap. You'll be caught by the right people.
Well, I think you're onto something here, so I'm going to pick up on that point. So when you say own your story, I completely identify with that, because as a migrant as well, all I ever wanted to do as a child was to blend into the background and not be noticed. I mean, it's hard enough to look different. The last thing you want is to go and admit that you've got a life, that's completely different to everyone else. But I think underneath it all, the reason why we find it so challenging to own our story is because we don't accept ourselves as who we were, right? So when you say put yourself out there, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to own who you are. You've got to accept who you are, but you've got to first of all accept you are before you can put it out there. The second point I'm going to pick up on is around authenticity. As you said, we're in the screen generation. The reality is that social media, we put up this curated version of ourselves that's just, unfortunately, just isn't real. You think you're behind everybody else. You think everybody else was doing better than you. And unfortunately, that sort of leaves everyone feeling like that. When you're out there and you're authentic, you're creating the kind of connections that you would not otherwise have. What I wanted to ask you is whether your relationships in real life have picked up once you started practicing that authenticity. I mean, what you're effectively sending out there is a message of who you really are as a person, meaning that essentially, think of it as sales funnel. You're qualifying very hard to get the right company into your life. Has that actually transpired in that? Have you attracted the right kind of people by being authentic to who you really are into your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I put this as a third lesson. The vibe is the tribe. So again, those emotional connections, we operate in frequency. And that frequency will be broadcast through our beliefs, the way we talk, and it does resonate with the right people. And that's one of the most beautiful things that has come out of the last 12 months of me being a solopreneur and me talking honestly and earnestly about what I'm doing and why, is that, I'm in the early stages of what I'm doing as a business owner, but the people that I'm attracting and the people that are drawn in are the people that I was hoping to attract in. One of the things I said on my, to my community is like, the thing that I'm most proud of this year is the people that I'm attracting, because it's not just the robotic, hey, I want to sell tech sort of people. It is the multi-dimensional individual. They are inspirational. They're athletes. They're artists. They have different aspects of themselves. They're not just singular people. And that's really cool, right? And that's really, really cool. As far as the family side of things or in the personal life, it does attract a different degree of people for sure. I've felt, for better or for worse, I've gotten to a lot closer to certain parts of my family that are resonating. I will say I got one of the more beautiful things about my family is the generational shift in understanding mind.
Mm.
And generational trauma is that, my parents, and my uncles and aunties, they're all boomers. And all of us, the kids, we're all basically millennials or elder millennials or Gen Zs. And the awareness of mental health, the awareness of trauma and how society is, shaping us for the worse, not for the better, we all understand that. And we're
Mm.
much, much closer as a generational family unit because we're all helping each other unpack the bullshit that's always been down
Yeah.
to our brains. And that's a beautiful thing, right?
Mm.
And the flip side of that, there are certain people in my family that I have repelled because the vibe is off now, because I'm at a different frequency. I'm at a higher frequency. They're not coming along for the journey and they're stuck in their ways, and that repels.
Mm.
I think it's when you,
But that's a blessing in disguise too, though, isn't it?
oh yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.
Mm.
100%. That's part of the level up, right? As we level up in life, we are raising our frequencies. We are raising our emotional and spiritual frequencies and vibrations. And that means that the people that are out of the range will fall off the bottom.
Mm.
And it's an important part of life, I think, especially in your mid-20s to early 30s, is that you do prune parts of your old life, people that don't serve you, people that you don't resonate and vibe with anymore.
Mhm.
That's an important part of your growth. And yeah, you have to do it. And people don't appreciate that. There is a lonely period when you do make that transition across. But the people that I've met through that, coming through the other side of that lonely period of transition, they are the tribe that you want. They are more aligned to your values and your beliefs. And you do get that new level of psychological safety and people just getting it. And that's powerful stuff.
100%. And I think for younger people, it's the insecurity. It's you need your tribe as a safety net, but when you realize that you've outgrown your tribe, it's often quite difficult for you to sort of move on. And I can sort of I'll use the example of the party crowd in your mid to late 20s, and you realize like that no longer serves you. That's no longer who you are. But you're afraid to lose them.
Yeah.
But yet, if you don't move on, the reality is that it's not going to be good for you, and your life is just going to be, it just isn't going to be fulfilled. And until you move on, I'd argue some of them are probably not ready to meet their other half,
No.
and get on with their life, right? The next stage of their life. So, yeah,
Mm.
really multi-dimensional lesson just there. Moving on, lesson number 7, unlearning is just as important as learning.
Similar to the mind stuff, right? Or an
Mm.
analogy that I like to use is that you have to think of your mind as like an iPhone, right? One of my things that I'm passionate about and exploring is the intersection of spirituality and technology. And I'm actually rereading Steve Jobs' biography,
Oh,
which is
yes.
over there. Fantastic book, all right? And
Mm.
Steve was someone that was at that. He is the forefather of that intersection of spirituality and technology and creativity and technology. And an analogy that I use is that you have to think of yourself as an iPhone, as a device, right? Because all the components are there. And, we have memory, we have our hard drives, we have our RAM, we have applications, which are our skills and our thoughts and our beliefs.
Yep.
And just like you get your iPhone, if you get one fresh out of the box and you've never used an iPhone before, there are a lot of apps on there that are pretty useless that you're never going to use, right?
Yep.
And you will either delete them or you'll put them in a folder and they're never to be used again. And very much so, when we come out of the box, when we come through the sausage factory of society, we are defaulted into applications and skills and learnings that will not serve us at all and are useless to us,
Yep.
right? Like I said, I know nothing about, financial literacy and had to learn the hard way that I don't know how to manage money. But for some reason, I understand about Birkin wheels and Ernest Shacklebolt going to Antarctica when I was like 14, right?
Yep.
So as you go through this transformational journey like I have, it's not just about adding new skills to your repertoire, which are important. Just as important is to declutter the mind, remove those skills, those applications, those beliefs that don't serve you anymore. That could be a negative way of thinking. They could be a perspective in life. It could be a fear that you haven't really addressed. And a lot of that uninstallation work is just as hard, if not harder, than the learning of new skills and processes. Because especially if you go into the core parental stuff, your core traumas, which are often subconscious and have been installed into us before we can even remember, before we're 7 years old.
Yep.
you can't get rid of that damage.
Mm.
You can't uninstall those negative programs. You actually
Mm.
just have to reduce your triggering, reduce your response to these core traumas, and get better at recovering from how they affect you physically, mentally, spiritually. So the unlearning and the rediscovery of the self is actually a lot of unpacking
Mm.
those unuseful behaviors, those unuseful applications, those unuseful skills. A great line that I think about often by Muhammad Ali, and I might be butchering this, but he goes, "It's not the mountain ahead that wears you out. It's the pebble in your shoe." And that pebble in your shoe is the negative self-talk, is the narratives, the false narratives that say you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what, right?
Yeah.
What's telling you that you can't?
Mm.
And if you don't analyze that, if you're not conscious of that, of those narratives, then they're going to weigh you down.
Mm.
And entrepreneurship is a spiritual practice for me because you have no choice but to look at yourself in every facet of who you are as an individual, because your own gaps as a leader, as a visionary for your own thing, for your own perspective in the future, will hurt you, will weigh you down. Going back to that financial management issue that I got, my programming, I have to unlearn my poor
Mm.
financial management skills and how to actually save money and spend effectively, or else
Yep.
I'm going to be in this constant loop of being broken in deep financial shit over and over again.
Over and again. Yep.
So, yeah.
Look, I think you've opened up a big, huge can of worms here. And you talked about school and childhood. So a lot of our parents probably tried their best. They were trying to raise us with the best of intentions, but ultimately, they did the best job with what they had. And
Mm,
there's limited understanding of a lot of these things. So unintentionally, they might have taught you stuff or values and practices and beliefs and all that didn't serve you, and same way it didn't serve them.
mm,
But becoming aware of it is probably something that we could do now that we've never had the opportunity to in the past. The other can of worms that you opened up is around the school system. Now, I'd argue that the school system no longer serves this generation of workers, certainly not in the AI generation. The schools have operated largely the same way for hundreds of years, but the society is changing so fast. I mean, the other day I was sort of reflecting back and you realize 2007 was when the first iPhones were released.
mm,
And you realize that's less than 20 years ago. And yet the world has already fundamentally changed and there hasn't even been one generation. And so what we get taught at schools might have been useful when you needed to get people out of their farms and into a factory for the industrial revolution, which is what I'd argue that the schooling system is designed, and that's why we get taught rote learning. But I think fundamentally what we're missing now is that next level of skills. It's about meaning making, it's about critical thinking, it's about understanding ethics and direction and all that, all the higher order skills that the schools aren't teaching us and aren't preparing us for.
mm,
The soft skills, navigating with people, relating to people, conflict resolution, all these skills that are absolutely fundamental to a success of a human being, and yet not even anywhere near a curriculum. Yeah, so this is a very fine point that you're making. Typically, we also, as part of our 10 lessons, we do throw your curveball around, what have you unlearned out of the 10 lessons? But given that you've already given us this lesson here, it's sounds like you're way ahead of the game. But moving on, lesson number 6, passion is free energy. So what's wrong with passion?
There's nothing wrong with passion.
Hmm.
That's what you should be pursuing in life. One of the fundamentals to the universe that I've understood throughout my own learnings is that everything starts with energy. Energy
Mhm.
is the first dimension of the universe. It's the fundamental,
Mhm.
right? And, one of the things that I teach, you're talking before about soft skills, personal skills, and human skills. That's really the crux of what I'm teaching in my academy, right? It's like
Mhm.
I'm rebuilding a curriculum of not just the skills to be a great tech seller, but the skills to be a great human based on my own
Mhm.
learnings. So I totally agree with what you're saying about how do we reinvent the skills that are needed to be successful in this new world. Totally agree with you there. With passion being free energy, when you go through this self actualization, you're going within. You're always going within. And energetic self awareness, bodily self awareness, you will feel energy thrill through you. Emotions are a form of energy.
Mhm.
And very often when you are on this self-actualization journey and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to be, and you define what makes you tick and what's that thing you want to aim for in life and go all in on, that can be a real big challenge for anyone, right? Is to find that direction, especially I think men, because the masculine in us is so directional. That is what we are. We want to go in a direction. And to find that direction is one of our biggest spiritual challenges. And I had struggled with that a couple of times along the way. First, when I was 18, going into university or going into VCE and thinking about what I wanted to do in university, I had no idea who I was and what I wanted to do. And I had a crisis of faith and, a little bit of a situation there. Getting in a few years into my technology sales career, I was really enjoying it. But again, it wasn't spiritually fulfilling. It didn't fulfill a deeper cause. I was great at it. I was making money, but I craved that depth in actually doing something impactful in my life. And one of the things that I did was search for what I'm passionate about. I think when you go through the self-actualization journey, the energy is breadcrumbs. What you're passionate about in life is breadcrumbs to purpose. What would you do if money wasn't an issue? What would you do what do you do when the time disappears, right? And you get lost in it.
Yep.
What lights you up in your day? These are the breadcrumbs towards the purposeful work that you can do to fill that fulfillment. Because realistically, our fulfillment really does come from an internal feeling of fulfillment, of justification, of purpose. That's really, it's just an energy inside of us. When a lot of people that I do mentor and coaching go and they're looking for that next step past that great tech sales career is, what do I really want to do with myself here? And I go, you got to get a journal and you got to journal your feelings every day. And I want you to track, what do you feel most passionate about? Where do you get lit up during the day? What lights you on fire? What drives you? It's because it's not very often, it's not technology sales. And I'll say it, I fell into my technology sales career. Nobody aspires to be an account executive, mate. There are people that are using it. Sure, they want to aspire to, but it's a vehicle for something else. Usually financial freedom or just leveling up in life, like I did. That energy, the passions, that is the best trail within yourself to find that purposeful work, that purposeful journey, that individual path that we all have within ourselves. I can't answer that for other people. I can only teach people how to seek it within themselves. And the way that I did it, where, finding my own passion for mentoring and development and teaching was by actually coaching and mentoring people and AEs for free for years inside Telstra and Cisco, because I loved it. And I would do it for nothing. And this, Tech Sales Academy, what I've got now is monetizing my passions. Really all it is, and building a structure around it. And I encourage other people to do the same. Right? Wherever you love, whatever you're passionate about, follow that, because that energy will feed you through the shit-eating part of creating your own feed. Right. That's what I've had to do these last 12 months. My first 12 months of solopreneur is do a lot of shit eating. And that's the necessary part. I'm starting something from scratch. But those wins of the things that you're really, truly passionate about, finding the right people, getting a client on board, people that really resonate with what you're doing. That's what's keeping me pushing through this. And again, I just pump on what I know.
100%. So in just reflecting on that, there's two things that makes me think of, right? One is understanding that you're not just managing your time, but you're also managing your energy. When you're doing something you're passionate about, you seem to get more energy, sort of free energy, as you refer to it, right? When you're doing something that you love and you're passionate about, you almost have more energy in the day, even though it's costing you in time. And so if you manage your energy properly, you will be guided closer towards sort of your life's mission, because you'll be doing what you're passionate about. And then the other point around the passion is that actually the thing that triggered my thought is how I actually came to be aware of it. And it's about asking yourself the right questions. And in fact, there was this exercise that I once did, which surprised even myself. I was asked this question. In fact, I was asked to sort of send out a survey to my closest friends. And in one of the questions in the survey was, what was I doing when I was at my best? And that's actually a roundabout way of asking exactly this question here around what is your passion? And it surprised me, because the answer from one of my real dear friends was that you're helping others. And to me, I thought, well, what do you mean when I'm helping others? I was at my best. And then I reflected back on that and I thought, yeah, you're right. These are the things that gave me energy. These are the things that I would do for free. I was happily doing it. And ultimately, if I could, as you alluded to, if I could monetize these passions, then ultimately, you don't have to work a day in your life because you're pursuing your passion. So I think there's a lot of wisdom to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
mean,
mm, mm,
there's a great fundamental psychological framework called the hierarchy of commitment.
mm,
And basically it's Maslow's hierarchy on steroids.
mhm,
And it's really about that self-actualization piece. And it's what I use it in sales to go, what do people actually value more than money? And
mm.
so it goes money, time, energy, identity. Okay. So
Oh.
money is the lowest form of commitment. You'll buy
Mhm,
something and you'll never use it.
mhm.
Right. But you'll always spend money to save time. Hence convenience stores, Amazon, 7-Eleven.
Yep.
On top of that is energy, right?
Mm,
And that is what gives us good energy. Now, people don't understand, this is one of the other further lessons, spoiler alert, that
mm,
emotions are energy.
mm,
And emotions such as love, such as joy, such as
mm,
passion. Again, when you are in love with someone, when you're having a joyous moment, the time flies, you'll spend the
mm,
money, right? On your family, a hobby, a concert, an event. So we will always, you'll give that up, right?
mm,
Those money and time will disappear for good energy. The top of the pyramid is identity.
mm,
And like we talked about before, the ego, what we are
mhm,
self-identified with is so powerful that we will commit money, time, energy to our identities. For
mm,
example, being a great tech seller, you'll commit your money, you maybe do a course, something like myself, you commit
mhm,
time to learning the skills, you commit to the pushing past the negative energy of failure and
mhm,
setbacks and rejection, or to
mhm,
reinforce the perspective and the identity that was set within ourselves.
mm,
So, but when it comes to that energy, again, that energy identity link is really, really powerful. And that's often status and how we perceive ourselves, and we will commit to that. But that energy part, the emotional energy, again, will throw money and time to feel good, right?
That's right. 100%. That's such an insight into people's motivations.
Mm.
All right. Lesson number 5. Everything you want is outside your comfort zone. We've heard variations of this one before, but essentially it's about being in that edge of the growth zone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it is really
mm,
about you have to get uncomfortable. The
mm,
the human mind, the human body is an adaptive species.
mm,
We are sponges of information. We respond to negative and positive stimuli in our environments. How do you get bigger muscles? You have to implement negative stimuli and overstress it. So then it adapts by building more muscle.
mm,
Same applies to our minds, right? So if you want to get better at a skill, we have to push our neurons and our muscles and our coordination and our brain functions
mm,
to, into a just uncomfortable place where it's formulating these new neural connections to then optimize and then become a tangible skill or something that we've learned, right? So we have to be uncomfortable constantly to grow, to develop. And like we talked about before, the ego seeks
mm,
familiarity.
mm,
It seeks familiarity of what it currently knows. It seeks the known. So if we want to get into the unknown, into an aspirational sense of ourselves, a higher version of ourselves, that requires pushing past what the ego understands to be the area of comfort.
yep.
And as we face that edge,
Mm,
the ego as a mechanism will always cast aspersions into our minds and out in front of us to go, people are going to make fun of me. What if
mm,
I fail? What if it goes wrong? Right?
mm,
What if I die? Right? It's
mm,
all really just variations of death and
mm,
fear and damage.
mm,
And at every level of growth, in every dimension of growth of who you are at a physical, mental, spiritual level, every skill that I've had to develop, again,
mm,
coming from a background of having no proper sales skills, no, relationship skills, whatever it is, whatever you develop, you have to constantly face the ego. You will always face doubt. You will always face insecurity. And that
mm,
is unfortunately core software, right? That is source code in the human experience
mm,
that is just there for the rest of our lives until we, hit the earth and, take a dirt nap. That is just it. We have to be
mm,
constantly fighting that part. And when we talk about, the universe is mental, it's a constant iteration game of going past that ego for every level, every single level. So yeah, it's really, that is it. It's just that if we, again, if we were coming out perfect and ready for this new world in the default state, we wouldn't have to aspire for more. We wouldn't have to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. But if you really want to get somewhere in this rapidly changing life and rapidly changing society, you're going to have to be uncomfortable, and you're going to be uncomfortable for a long time, right? Because life's a marathon, and I'm sure you get into a nice flow of things in a marathon, but it doesn't mean it still doesn't hurt, and you're still not
No, that's
shaken
right.
at every step of the journey, right? So yeah, it's just uh, owning the story is one part, and then accepting that is the nature of the human experience is another part of that as well.
Lesson number 4, seek help, guidance, and community.
There's this false narrative of the self-made man. Unfortunately, Western society favors individualism as opposed to community. And realistically, one of the fundamental problems that we have with society is the isolation of community, creating the nuclear family. You would understand in Asian cultures that the family unit's big, it's diverse, it's broad. There's a lot more communal factors, a lot more shared facilities. And one of the problems of the ego, and maybe this is just my own problems, is that I feel like I have to do everything myself. I was being an only child, and having to be an adult and become an adult very quickly. I've formulated hyper independence, and that means I feel like I have to carry the world on my shoulders to get things done in life. And that is not the right way to go about things. And I've burnt out 4 times in the last 4 years. You recognize that I did not know it all, because if I knew it all, I wouldn't have to ask myself, why am I so fucked up? And it wasn't until I had those realizations about myself and, had to humble my own perspective of what I thought I could do, that things really changed for me. And with the start of my transformation in 2019, it was accepting the fact that I didn't know how to manage my physical health. So I had to outsource that to someone that did, to a fitness coach. And then I realized, I had no idea how to manage my own mental health. And then I went to therapy and started going through that rabbit hole and getting the tools and processes that I need from an expert, from a therapist. And it wasn't until I started to reach out, accept help, recognize that I don't have all the answers, because we don't, did things really start to change. And what I've recognized as well, one of the most powerful things that we can do as a society and as a leader is to create psychological safety and create a space, whether it be a community, whatever it is, of a place where people can be safe to be themselves, can be safe to fail, can be safe to be vulnerable. And you don't recognize that until you feel psychologically safe within yourself, right? It's Christmas time, and I'm sure everyone's having a great time, but there's always lots of problems with it. It's family trauma, right? But like the great Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And psychological safety, that's what that is. It's the lack of psychological safety from my childhood traumas. And it wasn't until I got outside of my own family unit and found my own safety in my own nervous system and recognized I was out of the flames and I could rest and recover and recognize, I don't have this all, and had time to reflect because I wasn't in the war zone. That's when I recognized I needed help. That's when I recognized I need to have healthier examples, healthier sources, healthier ecosystems around me to develop myself up. And outsourcing that, the mental and physical health stuff, was transformative, right? I went, got shredded in 16 weeks during the pandemic. No gym. It was home workouts and a strict diet. When I, transformed myself mentally, understood that I had PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, trauma. It wasn't until I had an outsider's perspective instead of my ego protecting me and going, no, you don't need anyone else. You can do this all yourself. Like, you can fix this problem. That change is so important. You have to get outside yourself, and you have.
But that's easier said than done, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as sort of proud people, we don't want to admit that you need, psychological help. Like, it's especially harder for men than women, I think, in some respects. So for us to go and seek help, how did you convince yourself that it's okay to ask for help?
Well, it's like, how many times can I be making the same mistake? Yeah. For example, with my diet, I was overweight to obese the majority of my life for 29 years.
Mm.
And I had yo-yoed, I had tried diet fads, I had taken shortcuts, which did not work out. But I knew that I was avoiding consistent, disciplined work. And I knew that I did not know anything about nutrition because my parents didn't teach me anything about it. The school system didn't teach me about it. And I was, again, ego driven and looking for shortcuts and looking for the easiest way. So it's like, how many more times can I fail and fuck up doing this myself before I have to let the ego die and surrender the fact that I don't know what I'm doing?
Mm.
And same with the therapy, right? I know that these tools are available. I can see other examples of people, succeeding, right? When we have this bias that we think, oh, it'll work for other people, but not for us. Again, the ego, right? The ego seeking comfort, seeking the known, even if it's not good for us.
Mm.
And unfortunately, when it came to having these realizations, I was so fucking sick of who I was and hated who I saw in the mirror and was so frustrated with myself about not achieving the things that knew I was capable of, that I had to have that ego death, or I had to, really go through a dark hole, go through a dark night of the soul and actually just hit rock bottom to go, are you going to learn this lesson yet or not? Then start from there. And unfortunately, it's happened to me. It'll happen to a lot of people. A lot of people start again when the fear of the unknown isn't as bad as the pain of staying who you are, right?
Yep.
And when you are suffering within yourself so much, and you know that you've got to be better than this. There's got to be more to life than who you are instead of this constant suffering. But the effort that it takes to become that new person, to take the leap, everyone's afraid of that leap. And that usually you have to be prodded from the back with your own frustration, self-loathing, or, looking down the barrel of something else to go, okay, I have to do this now.
Yeah, it makes sense. If the pain is big enough, then you can then take that action. So lesson number 3, emotional intelligence is a key to the universe.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that probably one of the most important things that I've learned as a fundamental to myself and to the world at large. So there was the great Nikola Tesla. He said, if you want to find one of the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And he was talking about electricity, right? And, electricity is energy. It has different frequencies and vibrations, etc. I don't think he understood at the time that he was talking about emotional energy. And this was me integrating a lesson from Nikola Tesla, and then also the great Dr. Joe Dispenza. Have you ever heard of him or his work?
No, I've heard of Tesla. I haven't heard of Dispenza.
Yeah, so Dr. Joe Dispenza, he's a leading researcher in the neuroscience space, and he's got some really frontier research and results in alignment of emotional state in meditations to transform the body. And basically, you can transform your inner state through an alignment of emotions and thoughts. I mean, it is a form of manifestation, but there is now actual science-backed data that shows evidence of this. Before it was sort of woo-woo, and it is still a frontier technology and a frontier tool for the human condition. But as we converge, like we said, we're becoming, we're heading towards singularity. We are realizing that things are more connected. But essentially, what I learned from Dr. Joe was about emotional energy, and that emotions are the energy that we broadcast, right? And just like energy, they are broadcast in waves, and they have certain frequencies and vibrations, and the different frequencies vibrate at different levels. And when we talk about our emotional energy, I talk about the vibe, right? When you talk about the vibe of someone, the vibe of the room, the vibe of an event, right? You go to a sporting event, right? Boxing Day test. You're there, you can feel the pressure, you can feel the excitement. That is emotional energy. When you walk into a room and two people are having a hushed conversation and you can't hear them, but it's a serious conversation, that's emotional energy, right? So we are broadcasting these things. It is our sixth sense, that emotional energy. And it's our nervous systems that is the the organ to say, but it is the master organ of all the other senses. So we are actually broadcasting this emotional energy. And this is what we pick up on when we say we're great people persons and we can read people, right? The vibe of someone, that is it's not just intuition, it is science. And it is a revelation that we've had probably in the last 20-ish years, but it hasn't hit the mainstream necessarily.
Yep.
And a lot of people, myself included, only learn this when you go through the self-actualization journey and you go, what the hell is wrong with me? And you learn about trauma and you learn about emotional damage. And you learn about the nature of addiction and how this actually influences our nervous systems and what that is. One of the things that I teach in the academy that I don't think anybody else does is emotional energy, as like we just talked about, and the mastery of that. How can you use your reading skills, your empathetic skills, how to read the vibe, how to sense the room, how to read the room to get a dimension of the customer, the human experience that others do not, especially if you're in the technical realm, right?
Yep.
So there is a science to this. There is a structure to this. And, using my multidimensionality here, I've learnt to understand, attenuate, and to a degree master it through years of being a performer, being a musician, being a comedian, coming from a traumatic family background where my nervous system is hyperactive and I'm hyper attuned to people, right? Unfortunately, most empaths probably come from traumatic family backgrounds and they have overactive nervous systems and they are hyper aware of that emotional energy and the senses of other people's emotional attunement and can attune really quickly to that because they've had to as a survival mechanism when they were younger.
Yeah. But it can sometimes work against you too, right? I mean, it's almost like being able to hear people's thoughts.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it actually makes you less confident than you would otherwise be if you weren't paying to necessarily the negative energy that people might have. I mean, how do you know that you're reading it right? I mean, I agree with you 100%. The vibe is there. That the vibe is real, even though that it's not something that we necessarily understand. There's thousands of years or millions of years of evolutional psychology, or evolutional biology that have made us really, really attuned to these things. You can usually tell when someone's out to harm you, because we need that. We need that to survive, and I guess you could call that emotional intelligence. But at the same time, right? Sometimes you can misread a room and ultimately harming your understanding of the actual situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is part of the mastery. So there's two aspects of it, right? There is interoception and exteroception. So interoception is the sensing of the internal emotional state. So when you know you're hungry, when you know you're anxious, when you know you're upset. And exteroception is the feeling of other people's vibes out to you. That's your bullshit sensor, your bullshit detector. And one of the masteries that comes with this practice is knowing when you are reading someone versus when you are projecting your own state and your own ego onto what you think it is. And a lot of people, especially when they are stressed and out of the body state, which is where most of our nervous system attunement comes from. And when you're in the head, for example, when you're stressed out, you lose that sensitivity. And unfortunately, most of us in society are in our heads more than we are in our bodies. And that's an essential practice in your emotional self-mastery, is to self-regulate, get out of the monkey mind, get out of the beta state and the anxious mind and get into the more intuitive and tuned body. So yeah, that misreading usually is because you're nervous or you are here and not in the body. You're in your head and not in the body. So, a great example of that would be, you're in sales as well, when someone just won't shut the fuck up. And, they like the sound of their own voice and they're not reading the room. They are indulging in their own emotional energy of hearing themselves talk or, show value, as opposed to reading actually what the customer needs, what the room actually needs. Right? So that, again, it's an entirely new skill set. And yeah, definitely, you do need to condition it and understand the difference between both to be really good at it.
All right, going backwards. Lesson number 2. You are a player in the universe's game.
Yeah. So this is really a spiritual lesson, right? I was raised Muslim, but I wasn't religious, wasn't raised religious at all. So I've always had this bit of a disconnect to God and just didn't really have a spiritual identity for many years. I mean, that I struggled with my own identity. because I had the expectations of Islam put upon me without any of the education of what it means. And then when I went through this transformation, it was a spiritual awakening. And as you go through this journey of self-individuation, Carl Jung, great psychologist or psychiatrist, he talks about synchronicities, and these are breadcrumbs to the universe of your self-individuation journey. And I've had so many synchronicities occur in my life as I go deeper within myself and go on this journey of self-actualization and try and push that out into the world, that you not feel like you are a player in the universe's game, right? There is intelligent design, there is beauty in all things, that you might not be able to see the world, what's in front of you, but at a 10,000 mile view, this is where you need to be right now. And I'm actually feeling that right now through some situations in my life that we've kind of talked about. And again, with the integration of technology and individuality, spirituality, I kind of liken it to like, you play a video game, you play like, Grand Theft Auto, a single player game, or something like that. And you think about how in that world, that character feels like everything's real. But you, on the outside, you're the one that's actually controlling the game, right? And you've got that outsider's perspective. But if you run that guy into a wall, he's going to feel that. If you run into a car, if you shoot someone, whatever it is, they're going to feel it, but it's not necessarily real. And even to the point where you think about something like in a video game, every pixel is like an atom, right? And we're getting to a point now that games are getting so real, and there's so many more pixels, so much more rendering, that you kind of extrapolate that to the real world, right? Is that we are just comprised of trillions of atoms intelligently designed together. And how does that work, right? What is that powerful force behind us and what this perception of consciousness and reality is? There has to be a more intelligent design behind that, because ironically, we've been, just like we say that God created us in his own image, we are creating things in our own image, humanoid robots, video games, first player perspectives. And the universe is cyclical. It's the end. It's just the beginning, repeating again over and over. So, and also another part with that is like, when you aim for the highest form of self, you have no choice but to put faith in a higher power to get you where you need to go, because you will feel rudderless and directionless, or you are putting a lot of faith in things panning out time after time.
That you have no control over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in one of the, building your own business is a gigantic leap of faith. You can do all the things right, but you've really got to hope and pray that, the universe is conspiring to help you, which it is. But you must act in the fundamental laws of nature of the universe for it to help you.
That's right.
Yeah, you've got no choice. If you really want to do things great with integrity, keep your soul intact in the process, you have no choice but to recognize that you are a player in a bigger game.
Yep. Well, I think I know exactly what you're getting at. So it's almost like you got to have faith in this. Obviously you do your bit, but for your plans, for your aspiration to become real, you need a higher power to conspire with you to make that happen. I think I know what you're getting at there. And I think what I'll do is I'll just leave it for the listeners to decipher for themselves. But I think you make a bloody good point. So last lesson, which is, love the way you've done it. So lesson number 1, it starts with you.
So I have this firm belief, and I'm not the only one here, that we have a seed, an authentic seed of ourselves, our intuitive sense of self. This is what the universe gives upon us. We are a completely unique fingerprint of DNA and a combination of infinite possibility. And we have our own combination inside ourselves. And really, your life's journey, your self-individuation journey is in the word itself. It's individuation of the self. How can you uniquely unlock the talents, the gifts that you have within yourself and release into the world? And there's no one that is responsible for that self-actualization and that journey except for you. Nobody is going to come do this for you. It starts with your own will, your own self-belief, your own actions to aim and go, right? No one is here to help you. There's people who help you on the journey. Like there's a supporting crowd around you. Like I said, you never want to be alone in this process, but there is a significant part of the self-growth journey that is lonely. That is individual. That you will be doing hard work on your own with no idea of how it's actually going to pan out. And we have to do the work to nurture ourselves. And unfortunately, like we've talked about here, like society has disconnected us from the authentic self. It has disconnected us from the intuitive self. We are all in our heads. We are dopamine addicted to devices. You know, we are not listening to that intuition, that emotional intelligence, that deeper knowing. And that deeper knowledge, the emotional intelligence, is actually one of our first senses that we develop. You know, babies are all about emotional attunement to their parents before they develop sight and sound and smell and all those sorts of things, right? So you got to nurture that seed of who you are inside yourself. And just like a plant, you know, a plant will never grow in the right environment. There is a significant amount of nurture that's involved to cultivate the nature of who you are. And just like with bad soil, if you want that seed to grow, you've got to create a supportive environment, the right soil, the right nutrients, the right thoughts, the right beliefs, the right resources to cultivate that inner seed within yourself and develop that sense of self-belief that you can be different and get out into the world and be your own person. And that's a lot of that inner work that we've just talked about. And that is all to re-download, reprogram yourself from one that is negative self-talk to positive self-talk, to abundance, to possibility instead of negativity, telling yourself you can instead of you can't. And that all starts with you, because nobody understands your own troubles in here. Nobody understands your unique combination of damage that you've got as well.
That's right.
And so again, that's one of the beauties of what I do and what other creators do that are just talking about their journeys, is that we get isolated and disconnected from ourselves because we think our problems are uniquely ours. But when people resonate with me, they resonate with the same problems that I've had, the same negative inner talk, the same limiting beliefs, the same situations. They think, oh shit, I thought that was just me. It's actually someone else as well. And you go, oh shit, the more that we talk about these things, the more we realize we're all connected. We're all having the same experience in slightly different ways, but 99.9% of the same experience. But we just aren't recognized because we're not talking about it and sharing it with the world. If you want to tune yourself to a higher power, when you want to tune into that frequency of the highest self, that is up to you. This is your life, your abundance, your journey. No one's going to do it for you. And that's why it sucks, but it's worth every step. It's worth every drop, every bit of pain. You have to do it. It has to be you. People can help you on the journey, but it must be you first and foremost.
No, it's an extremely empowering lesson, I think. Yes, you will get help along the way, you know, if you have faith and all that in the last lesson, but this lesson is all about that it starts with you, that you have to make that decision, you have to take that first step, and clearly a lot of it, the work is in here.
Absolutely.
More than anything else. So that is an incredibly powerful lesson. And thank you so much for sharing that lesson. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, mate. Likewise. Great to chat.
Thank you. And that's all for today's episode of 10 Lessons Learned. A big thank you to our guest, Jameel Rehman, for sharing his incredible insights and lessons through his life. And thanks as well to our amazing team, Cody Como, our episode editor, E. Wang, who managed our marketing, social media, and our producer, Robert Hosry. This podcast is supported by the Professional Development Forum and listeners like you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's lessons. Drop us a line at podcast@10lessonslearned.com. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a lesson that could change your life. Thanks for tuning in to 10 Lessons Learned, where we're making the world a little wiser, lesson by lesson. Thank you.